Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for a behind the scenes dive into Legendary Entertainment's The Toxic Avenger. I'm Alex DiVincenzo from Bloody Disgusting, and today we have with us one of the co composers. Please welcome Will Blair.
Hello, Alex. Thank you for having us. I'm my brother, co-composer Brooke couldn't be here, but thanks again for having us. Looking forward to it.
Of course. We also have the editors of the film. Please welcome Brett W. Bachman.
Hello.
Thank you all for your time. We loved the movie, and I'm really excited to dive into it. So let's get started, shall we?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
What would you each describe as your overall creative vision for the film? And what relationship, if any, did you have with the 1984 original?
Overall creative vision. I think weird, sweet, gross was the mantra that we repeated the most in the editing room. Macon's overall North Star on the project was honoring the original. This was a fan that is made for trauma people. This is like we had to capture the tone, the sensibility of the original. Uh, and yet, the biggest departure would be this stepfather stepson relationship in the film that grounds the emotional stakes. So it was a finding the way to balance the bombastic, the large camp components, the viscera, the silliness, the goofiness, the Looney Tunes Tex Avery quality of the all of the things surrounding this grounded father son story. So I think almost all of our discussions revolved around making sure that we maintain that core integrity, but making everything else just silly, stupid, dumb.
I would have to agree with Brett. I think our sort of marching orders probably followed these early conversations that Brett and Macon had, which were, like I mentioned, being true sort of to the original in from a musical perspective. In that um, the original 1984 score soundtrack had literally everything in it. I think it was um, an awesome creative decision made by Lloyd and the team. Also, I'd have to guess it's like, resources and budgetary decisions where there was a lot of their friends were contributing songs to the soundtrack. They got a public domain piece with Night on Bald Mountain that was the big, made famous in Disney's Fantasia, and then the transformation scene in 1984, and our version of that became the transformation scene in this version. But the original goes through like punk rock, like weird electro stuff again, Night on Bald Mountain, um, and noisy score. And so Macon's vision was literally, let's throw the entire kitchen sink into this thing, sort of give it a trauma treatment musically by including sort of as many different styles as possible. Yeah, and then as Brent mentioned, the slightly more tender-hearted father-son element to it allowed us um, to go there musically as well, and some of those like themes and motifs that accompany the um, the father stepson story. Um, I think were sort of our new twist on this Macon's modern version of it. Yeah.
Did you feel any pressure knowing the cult fan base that the original film has?
Yes, I think so.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, you of course want to make sure your core audience feels like they're being seen, they're being heard. This ultimately is a film made for a genre crowd. Uh, and yet at the same time, you want to make sure you're not rehashing and just recycling and redoing this, treading the same ground that the original has. You want to offer something new. A lot of our conversations focus around how can you keep things new, surprising, and yet honor what came before. Trying to strive between those two things, I think, really was present in the DNA from in the material from the get go. I mean, it's obvious reading Macon's the script was that is a giant trauma fan. I mean, the references, the Easter eggs, the care to detail. But I think it's pretty clear that he didn't want to just do what Lloyd and team had done, 30 years ago. This was something that they wanted to reinvigorate, something that they wanted to do a new take on, but in the shared universe. And that comes with a bit of a responsibility to honor what came before, but also do something new and give something uh, different for audiences.
Will, as Macon's
Yeah.
brother, you and Brooke obviously have plenty of experience working with him over the years. How did the Toxic Avenger differ from your previous collaborations?
Yeah. Again, I think just the sheer volume of like styles, genres, stylistic approaches, um, the volume of music itself, just the number of minutes to accompany such like a um, over the top, essentially superhero story. Um, Also, unlike Macon's first feature and other projects we've been a part of with him, this got a pretty full orchestral treatment kind of throughout the process as we went, which is a little unorthodox, but that's how we like to work, and also a much larger few orchestral sections, primarily featuring the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. But to know that we were going to end up there requires just a a certain lift and a certain sort of plan to get there. But the foundation of it all, where we started, where Macon wanted us to put our energy first, was the bones of it, which was this sort of like messy, at times like 70s crime jazz. At
Mhm.
other times, it was just like messy, sloppy rock and roll score. Again, that had to evolve into a much bigger orchestral score that you know and still sound like it's part of Troma and still sound like it it was made for Toxie. And in there, at times, I think there's the occasional, just classic superhero theme that we wouldn't get to do in some of Macon's, earlier projects where the stakes are smaller and the story is a little more contained and the setting is a little more contained. There's often not room for those big sweeping, um, classic Hollywood moments that we were able to go for with this one.
Although it is so eclectic, is there a specific cue in the film that you would say best represents, the evolution of your collaboration, or maybe a favorite cue you'd like to point out?
Um, Again, I mentioned the Night on Bald Mountain, and this was our sort of rearrangement and reimagining of a classic and now public domain piece by Modest Migorsky. But ours has burps in it. It has farts in it. It has like our old roommates from college are screaming in it at the top of their lungs just via like voice memo samples we got them to send us. I think it has Brooke and maybe Macon's children screaming in it in the background. So, but also like unlike the original version, there's tons of heavy metal guitar. We got to work with Damian Paris from a great New York City based band called the Giraffes, and he came down and just did like you know like shredding 80s metal guitar on top of it, full drum, multiple drum sets on top of it. So it was this very bombastic, on steroids, over the top version of this piece that has been around for 100 plus years. I think that I think when Macon said let's add burps and farts to it, that was the evolution of our of our creative process. Also, I'd mention the songs. Like not every movie that we've done, especially with Macon, requires original songs, but to do some of those for this movie specifically, The Good Things, which was
Yeah.
the very first thing Macon asked us to write before they even shot the movie, which was just going to be a very sincere, classic, late 50s doo-wop song that would function as sort of Winston's favorite tune in the movie. And I think that um, sort of became, I don't know, doesn't really fit into the overall motifs of the movie. It's a standalone piece, but something unique we got to do just for this one. Yeah.
My wife saw Rough Cut and she's been waiting to hear that song or have that song on Spotify for 3 years.
Yeah. Oh, it's finally there. We have too.
We've kind of touched on the tonal shift from crude humor to genuine, heartfelt moments throughout the movie. Uh, Brett, what was your approach to strike that balance in the edit?
Twofold. So the first thing we do is try to treat the relationship between Winston and Wade as sincerely as possible. We never try and poke fun at it. We never try and derive. We derive humor. Some of the scenes are comically tinged, but we never try and make fun of this dynamic. We try and treat this as sincere, treat both parties with empathy, and really make sure that core story functions very well on its own. Aside from all the genre components, and aside from comedy, aside from all the goo and gore that we have surrounding it, that really has to feel earnest, sincere, grounded, and you have to feel for these two. Now, the other side of this is the everything else in the film, the bombastic size of the humor, the Greek chorus jokes, the sound design, the music, the silliness, everything else kind of exists in a shell around this core. And it was really surprising to discover, like, as long as we treated that core component with a degree of sincerity, the audience told us that we could do really anything else. Like, yes, turn everything up to 13. We want more liquid. We want more silliness. We want raise the stakes on everything else. And yet, it all kind of came down to, as long as you protect those two characters and get the audience rooting for them, you can kind of do anything else. So we just treated Winston, Toxie, and Wade with sincerity and made sure that tonally felt cohesive. uh, it afforded us a lot of other opportunities in the edit, and that was a surprising discovery, but one I think we tried to lean really hard into.
Oh, you're no stranger to kind of balancing genres, including recent works like Companion, Hard Eyes. Do you see any through lines in your work between movies like that and Toxie?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Yes, I do. Kind of coincidentally, all these films are about relationships, and not a traditional, not a protagonist and antagonist in this sense, but like a lot of these films, Companion, Hard Eyes, Toxie, you have two central protagonists and the film revolves around their core relationships. In the sense of Toxie, it's a stepfather and a stepson at odds, trying to find the ability to communicate. In Companion, it's a toxic relationship, and it's a story about a young. She's an android, but we treat her as a human, and we treat the relationship sincerely, even though it is a robot and an incel. We're trying to treat that sincerely. And the same with Hard Eyes. It is a romantic It's a romantic comedy that a horror film gets built around. That a slasher film gets built around. So with all three of these films, my directors and I take the approach of making sure that these core dynamics work on their own. You could take these characters and move them into a different genre. You could move them into a drama space. You could move them into a musical, but those dynamics need to stay the same. Like, you have to make sure that you're mining the best material from your actors, that the audience is developing empathy for each one of these characters. Like I said, it's not a conventional good guy, bad guy situation with these dynamics. You're looking for the ability to connect with both these characters as they work their way through a larger plot or a larger story. So it's really important you are following both characters and feeling for both of them, and you're not making fun of them. You're not making fun of that dynamic. A film like Companion, where you have a guy that's a bit more of a bad guy, which is kind of the antithesis to what I'm saying, but you're treating that relationship that gradually builds to that point. You don't really want to make fun of it. The same way that Hard Eyes, yes, it's a rom-com and a slasher, but you're trying to make sure that it works as a Josh Rubin, my director on that movie, wanted to make sure it worked as a rom-com first and foremost, that the material we're getting in from our actors works on its own. And that way, when the shit hits the fan with the Hard Eyes Killer coming out of the closet, you have a larger degree of involvement in their plight. And the same goes with Toxie. You want to make sure that Winston's journey is not just becoming a hero, it's also becoming a father and discovering that sense of responsibility, that sense of, we say, one of the lines that kind of embodies this in the film is, sometimes you got to do something. In the beginning of the movie, when he declines to involve himself and stop this his friend's cat from getting abducted, he says to Wade, sometimes you just it's better to do nothing. And then that's directly contradicted halfway through the movie when he says sometimes you have to do something, when he fully takes up the mantle of a hero. And so it's really important that, like, that, and his stepson then sees him take on this new role. So it's really important for all of these films that you treat these central relationships with a degree of sensitivity, empathy, and that way you can build more lunacy around all this stuff. But as long as you have that core central story that's being told and with characters you can connect to, you have a lot of range.
Will, you mentioned the good things, but we can't let the other, in-universe music go unmentioned with the killer nuts. How did you and Brooke go about writing music from that perspective?
Oh dear. Also, like the good things, that killer nuts we needed to really figure out before making even shot the movie. So probably shortly after we read one of the first drafts of the script, because the music is featured in the production of the movie. Figuring out, this was the hardest thing we've ever done. This was the biggest score we've ever written. This was the most amount of musicians and recording sessions and logistics we've ever managed. But strangely, the Killer Nuts was like the easiest thing that just came to us because we were, um, the Blair brothers were born in the late 70s, so we were kids in the 80s, which meant we were coming up in the like early 90s learning how to play music. Um, Surrounded by, whether we liked it or not, this rap rock stuff. Um, um, and yeah, back then, as teenagers learning how to play, that was definitely on the table. That was like those riffs, those guitar riffs, those just the grooves themselves, the way that bands like that started to incorporate, a DJ or sampling or some sort of additional electronic production, things that are like very commonplace now. That was kind of starting back then. Um, and there was a lot of these guys that were just very, very questionable rappers that insisted on fusing those two genres. So we sort of knew how to do it, and just from a musical perspective, Macon's marching orders, which sounded like a lot of fun, were like, it's sort of small town heroes, but they are major label, or like, on the cusp of major label, or they've got some production chops. They're not totally untalented. Um, they're just it's like major label music made by some of the worst people in the world that you don't want to spend any time with. So in doing that, we kind of knew the sound. Like there was, we did have to treat that major label sound kind of, as Brett mentioned, like sincerely. That the guitars and the drums, there's nothing tongue in cheek about it. It's like we just had to go to 2004 and put everything again on steroids a little bit. Um, and the musical component came together pretty quickly. We invited a couple, uh, Chris Wilson, a great drummer who plays with Ted Leo and the Pharmacist, helped to do a little bit of drumming, but by and large it was Brooke and I, recording and layering the Nuts instruments. The lyrics, most of which for the Nuts, came from Macon Blair's imagination. And, there definitely was a time where the three of us all ended up at college together, where there was like you know, a really sloppy basement parody rap group, perhaps led by Macon. He would cringe right now if he knew this. And this was before we knew anything about, Tenacious D or Lonely Island was around. This was early parody rap, where we were doing it from the perspective of someone just dumber than yourself, I think was the idea. And so, Macon, for Crazy and Dangerous, I think Macon wrote all the lyrics for My Baby is an Axe, um, which was also very sincere. It wasn't like my girlfriend's baby. It was like my child, my offspring happens to actually be an axe. Macon texted us the idea for that song. We forget exactly what it was, but his phone auto corrected. It was supposed to be My Baby is a something else. Something else that made more sense, and I'm forgetting what that word was. But his phone auto corrected it to axe, and we just went with it, and so that became the title of the song. He and I wrote those lyrics together, and then we had like amazing vocalists help us flesh it out. And this was long before he even cast Julian Kostov as Bud Berserk, the lead rapper of the Nuts. Um, and our only, as musicians who had put a lot of work into it, our only request was like, make him find the best actor you can possibly find, but please, like, there's nothing worse than a good actor who can't really, like, fake a rap performance or something like that. We have to do a bunch of studio trickery to pull off that performance. So we said, maybe rapping is part of that audition process when you're looking for dessert. And he sent us a few tapes, and honestly, Julian was the only one anyone really watched. I mean, think that if I'm not mistaken, there was like an Eminem couple verses from an Eminem song that he included in his audition, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is the guy!" As soon as they put that first draft of makeup on him, it was like undeniable. And he quickly, I think there was just a few days to go before they started shooting in Bulgaria, and he jumped into a recording studio and kind of swapped out all of our demo vocals and really brought to life the final take from the nuts. So again, to answer your question, um, maybe the most painless and fun and um, few songs that we got to do for the movie. Yeah, I hope there is more Killer Nuts in some universe in the future. I think whether we all like it or not, they deserve like a full album.
Brett, do you have a personal favorite scene to edit or a particularly challenging scene that you're proud of how it came out?
Oh yeah, two come to mind off the top of my head, and that would be the transformation sequence and Mismeet, both around the middle of the film. So transformation sequence was at the time, this was like 2022 when we started started the film. Toxie was bigger than like my last six films combined from a budgetary standpoint. We're not a big movie by any stretch of the imagination. We're legendary that does some very big movies, Dune, Godzilla. And so I was stepping into the movie with knowing that I'm going to rely a lot of help from my assistants and visual effect editors, and maybe this will be an opportunity I get to play with post-viz and animatics and some larger set pieces. And so I kind of had that mentality when I'm receiving these dailies for the transformation sequence. And it really wasn't a whole lot. Like we had shot Peter on a blue screen and he was on a crane to kind of move things around at one point to kind of look like he's spiraling into something. And then we had like a close-up of him yelling and screaming. And then Macon had shot a lot of texture. So he had shot green goo bubbling and boiling. He had shot like these blue tendrils flapping around. They had shot the black eye, like the eyeball, the big eyeball filling with black liquid that kind of spirals around. But it wasn't obvious kind of what to do with all of this. And I was like, okay, I'll talk to Macon once they wrap, and I'm sure there's storyboards or an animatic or something that gives me a little bit more feedback on how to make this. And I discovered there was not. There was really not a whole. There was a shot list, but there wasn't like a storyboard sequence or like something I could look at that would kind of detail where this was. I was speaking to Macon about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I figured we would just kind of make something together." And there was no grand plan for how to make this. And I figured, okay, we're starting director's cut. We have so much to work on just in terms of like getting the movie in shape. I'm sure we're going to have folks that are going to help out with this transformation sequence the cavalry will come and save us to kind of tell us what to do with this very vast visual effects sequence. And they had shot, like I said, a lot of cool stuff, but I didn't really know what to do with it. Bones growing and calcifying and adding thickness that we had to reverse and stuff. But it became pretty obvious, like about a month into director's cut, that there was no cavalry. No one was coming to save us and build this. So I realized I just can't delegate this out. We need to build something so we can begin to talk to our visual effects team and our vendors. Like, here's a rough cut of what the transformation sequence is going to look like. So this was a bit outside of my experience, at least in Avid, to learn how to do this, which is a wonderful program, but it's a bit of an old horse in the sense that it's not great at some of these materials. So I'm exporting shot after shot after shot, and I'm throwing it into After Effects so I can build what this thing could be. So I'm building this transformation sequence kind of from scratch with these rough ideas. I'm taking some inspirations, of course, from the original. So we have this point in the original where Melvin is turning white and like he's leaving these streaks of purple color behind him. I think we immediately knew that Bald Mountain would have to be incorporated at some point into this, or we had to build around Bald Mountain. And then we started to kind of play with what's the spine of this? Like, how do we make this sequence? How do we tell a story with this material? And so we had some ideas that we began to play with. We referenced Vertigo, like I said, the original, looked at some other psychedelic sequences and from some other films, and began to build this lunatic sequence playing with things like Peter screaming, and we have little Peter kind of flying around. Like, wouldn't it be fun if little Peter then came back around and went into big Peter's mouth, like during a scream? And then we had one version where I remember like the mop was like floating in liquid, and like all these electrical sparks from the mop started this activity that didn't make it into the final version. But it was really fun to just kind of really play with a different set of skill sets that we don't typically do in the offline edit. So it was a really fun handoff between me doing like this animatic sequence, figuring out the tone, figuring out like the core beats in this, and then handing this off to a more experienced visual effect team to really carry across the finish line. But certainly challenging and fun. And then the other scene I'll touch on briefly, just because I've talked a lot about transformation sequence, was our Miss Meat sequence. And what I really loved about this overall sequence in the film is that it comes at your midpoint, and it comes at a very important point in the movie, in Winston's journey of becoming a little bit more self-assured, becoming a hero. He's outing himself into the public when just, a few scenes ago, everyone was trying to kill him. They were chasing him down, and a mob had formed to try and, just to kill the mutant. And so he's said to himself, restaurant to try and save all these hostages, putting himself at great peril. So from a structural standpoint, I knew it had to have a lot of heart to it from Winston's journey, but it also has a lot of fun genre elements. It has fights, it has comedy, it's very broad at times. And you have to feel like this guy is doing something special and emotional. So it was balancing the more broad humor elements with, the guys reading off these list of demands, but also setting real stakes for the sequence as well. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I love it so much is that within all of this intercut sequence and all of the fun gore elements and the fight stuff that they shot, it still has to work as one of the primary emotional beats in the movie. And the beat I'm talking about is like when Winston comes out and the news is interviewing him, and he says, "Sometimes you got to do something," which is a very core moment of the film. And we made a really fun discovery while editing the movie, to bring in Jacob Tremblay's reaction to watching his stepdad on TV say this and realize this hero that just saved all these people was my stepdad. From a scripted standpoint, that was supposed to happen later in the film. And so we would have like Winston coming out as a hero. Then you would have a few scenes later, Jacob Tremblay discovering that, oh shit, my stepdad is this figure. And then you have the Garbinger character and everyone else realizing like, oh, we know who this guy is. We can track him down. We made a really fun discovery in the test screening process, like showing to some friends and family, that we could maximize the emotional potency of this scene by intercutting all of this stuff. So we moved all of Jacob Tremblay's scenes earlier to make it seem like instead of watching a later newscast, he was watching this happen live. And when you have Winston say, "Sometimes you got to do something," instead of waiting for this emotional beat later in the movie, now you have Jacob Tremblay's character realizing this in real time. There's a very strong cause and effect that just upped your emotional involvement in the scene, in their dynamics, and in the movie overall. And that was a really fun discovery, and I think it had some really good ripple effects to bring you in and involve you more into the movie from an emotional standpoint. So I think it's a good representation of like that scene is a good representation of like how we balanced the core the crazier elements, the butt guts, the silliness of the movie, the action. But like I said, at its art, it's got to work as an intimate, smaller story first and foremost. And you can build everything around that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating discovery because you would think watching it, I mean, it's seamless. You would think that's how it was always meant to be, and it plays so well.
It's one of the more fun discoveries we made together on the film, and I'm really happy with it. Yeah, it seems like in hindsight, like, oh yeah, that's obvious. It should be that way. But it's really surprising, like how often like, we make little discoveries like that in the editing process, and you would never know.
This movie has such a fun cast. We've touched on a few names. I mean, you have Peter Dinklage, Kevin Bacon, Elijah Wood, to name a few. All just totally bringing their A game and swinging for the fences. From either a music or an editing perspective, can either of you recall a moment where a particular performance shaped your creative approach?
At risk of like pulling the curtain back a little too far, Louisa's performance of Toxie in this suit, um, I think, became our original Toxie. And this is not to diminish any part of Peter's performance. I mean, we got to know um, Winston early on as Brett and Macon so perfectly set up as this guy you're rooting for. Um, we're getting these early cuts before Peter's voice is dubbed back into back over Louisa's performance, and Louisa's delivering a lot of these lines online in character, again, to be dubbed over later. But that was the Toxic performance we really got to know, and in there we can see Peter's character, we can hear Winston. We've read Lincoln's script 1,000 times. We kind of knew where it was going, and we had to use our imagination in that Toxie's voice would be, you know, added and altered later. But just getting to know the character through Louisa's physical performance was like, um, uh, yeah, that was our like guiding light sort of, and I think part of it is just having grown up with whatever Macon was watching when we were kids was the coolest thing in the world. And often that was, again, late 80s stuff with a lot of practical effects, folks in suits, puppetry, real tactile, tangible characters, of course, just all the creatures from Star Wars and beyond. But that real person inside of a well-designed latex suit, like to us, nothing kind of beats that. And it's certainly not every day we get to score a movie that has a character like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think from the transformation sequence on, just sort of getting to know the character through Louise's um, interpretation of it, while being buried under so much makeup, I think was pretty exciting to watch.
Yeah. I'd like to throw a shout out to our villains, like Kevin Bacon, Julia Davis, Elijah Wood. I think some of the goes without saying that like Louisa's and Peter's work in the film was remarkable, and I've never had the experience of like building the performance of a central character that involved two actors before, and how that had to feel like a waltz. That had to feel like a perfect dance between Peter doing rehearsals and then Louisa studying those rehearsals and then doing her interpretation of those rehearsals on camera, and then Peter coming back for ADR and looking at Louisa doing an impression of him, and then adding on to that, and then having to kind of cycle that through. That it was a really interesting process of them both interpreting the same source material and doing their thing. But like I said, back to Kevin, Elijah, and Julia. One of the things I always liked about Macon's script is that he certainly vilifies a few characters in there. But with this trio of numbskulls over at BTH, uh, there's a degree of pity to all of them. Like, I remember one particular beat in the movie where Jacob Tremblay is in the van with the nuts, and Elijah's like, "Don't worry, we just want him." And Jacob says something to the extent of like, "What would you do if you were held hostage?" And Elijah just has this look of just like absolute sadness and pity on his face. And we throw some Mozart Requiem under there to kind of make fun of it a little bit. But there's a huge degree of pity, I think, the audience that I had, at least, for these characters viewing the dailies. Kevin's character Bob has been sidelined. He's really a middleman with this big monster at the top, and he's this middleman at this company. But like he's always relegated to kind of this bozo, and he's a little dull and a little dim, I should say, as a character. And you're meant to kind of, I kind of feel bad for him when he's interacting with this mobster. He's just being completely belittled, and he projects all of that pain onto his assistant Julia, or sorry, I say associate Julia in the movie, and his brother, played by Elijah. And I had this sense that it was almost like an inverse character journey, where you had the Winston and Wade storyline was about a family coming together, and these trio of characters was about devolution of a family dynamic between Kevin and Elijah and Julie as individuals who are just going farther and farther apart in the film. And you could tell by their performances, just through the glances and the looks, that they're just looking for validation in one of, like, at least Julie and Elijah are just looking for validation with this Bob Garbinger character, and they never get it. They're just looking for a sense of connection and a sense of a degree of appreciation. And that certainly influenced the way I'm looking at the material when I'm building up the material to find opportunities to kind of reflect this parallel throughout. And it's something that I don't know how evident that was necessarily on the page, but it's certainly something you're getting out of their performance, and you're getting, I'm hoping, made its way into the movie to kind of feel that these intersecting paths. So by the end, although you discover Elijah's a little bit more of an anti-hero at the end, hopefully audiences are a bit more emotionally involved in his character and Julia's character, that stretch, or you never completely vilify these people. You always have a little small degree of understanding about what they're going for. So it hopefully makes you a little bit more emotionally involved in their stories.
You're exactly right. And just to further shout out Elijah's performance,
Yeah.
under this makeup and this hair piece and this disturbing loss of hair and like color to his flesh and everything, just again another great example of the hair and makeup team just like making you feel so sorry for this guy.
It's all silly, it's all exaggerated, and yet it comes from such I think a very relatable place. And it's one of my favorite things about the script and Macon's work and juggling these tones throughout the film. There's always a very human quality you can link back to with these guys.
For sure.
Yes, I spoke to Lloyd Kaufman about the film at Comic-Con, and he was, praised everything about it, but particularly called out the pathos of the film, which, he said, it bests the original in his opinion because of that. Will, the soundtrack is getting a vinyl release later this fall. What can fans expect from the physical edition?
Yeah, actually, as of this morning, very exciting. We just saw final artwork from our friends at Mutant, who are graciously pressing the whole album, and a 8 to 10 page little booklet. And just, I don't want to spoil things for vinyl fans and just collectors of soundtracks, but just from an art direction standpoint, it's astonishing, and it's a cool. Macon got to contribute some fun, thorough liner notes explaining sort of his vision for the whole soundtrack. So definitely like a very cool collector's piece that I think fans of the original will enjoy. Yeah, I think don't quote me on that. I think I heard late October, early November. That should be ready.
I have already pre-ordered it. I'm very excited. I'm looking for all the goodies that are coming out in this movie. I think we're getting a graphic novel. There's an adaptation novel. There was a podcast that came out in advance of this.
Yeah,
it's a good to be a fan of Troma.
Oh, it is. I got the collector's edition, sort of popcorn bucket of the steel drum with the green goo spilling over. And as of this week, my wife and I welcomed we have an 8-week-old new baby in the family.
Congratulations.
Yes, man.
So thank you so much. So the collector's popcorn edition has become the diaper pail in the house that sits next to the changing table and
something kind of poetic about that.
I think Lloyd would approve.
I think he would.
Winding down here, how does it feel to kind of finally have your work on the Toxic Avenger out there for people to enjoy after kind of an extended delay from its festival run to its theatrical release?
Relief, cathartic, happy. It's one of my favorite experiences just in filmmaking period was seeing this film back to back at Fantastic Fest opening night, and then later at Beyond Fest in Los Angeles with a packed crowd. The buzz, the energy, the overall ambiance in the movie theater, the audience reacting to like some of these jokes and set pieces in the film was fantastic. And this is a film very much made for fans. You know who you are coming into this movie. If it's going to be on your wavelength or not. No one, I think, on the movie was interested in making a film that was going to try and hit 4 quadrants. No one is interested in making a movie that's made for the general public. Like this is made for fans, and I'm so happy that it's finding its crowd. It's you know who you are.
Yeah, if your ears perked up when we said butt guts earlier, this is the
Yes.
movie for you.
Yeah, and like to Legendary's credit, I mean, they knew who our audience was for, what we were going after, and supported us through trying to make the best movie possible through visual effects, through the development process, through testing. Like they had the confidence to find a partner that would do the movie right, and I think we've certainly found that with Cineverse. Like they really get the movie. I'm very excited for what they've been doing in the last few months with championing this film. It's like a big relief knowing that it is in really capable hands. And there was certainly a point where I think we were all, at least I know, was a little worried. Like
Oh yeah,
the film distribution marketplace is not the same that it was, even 5 years ago, when we made the
Mhm.
movie in the first place.
yeah,
And I think best case is that this now finds a longevity with a devoted fan base. And I mean, I think if we can get this movie in sleepovers or being thrown on at parties at 11:30 p.m. or at midnight, that's best case for a movie like this. That's what it's made
yeah.
for.
Definitely a big sigh of relief, and a big cause for celebration too. Like we definitely, like Brett mentioned, there was a concern that this day might not come at some point. Um, so a lot of fun to see it in theater on opening night, as I mentioned earlier, with some of the musicians and folks that helped work on the score, but also um, maybe the timing of it kind of is perfect in some ways. It feels like, um, you know, regardless of who you are, I think we could agree there's culturally, definitely environmentally, maybe politically, we are in a tumultuous place at times. It feels like we're hopefully in a transformative place. Um, so to have a movie come out that just champions like silliness and goofiness and butt guts and
Yeah.
practical gore, having something feel real silly, I think, uh, is a lot of fun to watch right now in a movie that champions, an underdog just trying to do something right by his son. I think was a perfect timing for it to come out now. Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. It's a party movie.
yeah,
like, like it's meant to throw on, have a good time with your buddies, order
yeah,
some pizza. Like it's. I'm very much. I think you're right, Will. I think people are looking for fun at the movies. They're looking for
100%.
some escapism. And I don't. If you look at what's been coming out the last few years, I don't know how much of that we've had aside from some other superhero films.
Yeah,
How much I would love to see more comedies coming out in theaters. I would love to get more Naked Guns out in theaters. I would
yeah,
love to have more Toxic Avengers coming out in theaters. Like that type of
exactly.
audience involvement and community, standing around. I would love to have more of that. And it seems like a lot of our options have just been limited the last few years.
Very well said. And to wrap up, for either of you, are there any other cult classics, maybe from your childhood or modern properties, universes that you'd like to play around in?
Oh man. Uh, I would love to see more Zucker Brothers style humor. Like, I'm not saying I want another reboot or remake of Airplane. It sounds sacrilegious to say out loud. But I would certainly, I would love to get more silliness in movies. I just as a fan of that type of stuff. Certainly, we just touched on this, but yeah, escapism. I would love more, mid-budget escapism in films. More films like The Mask, I suppose.
Yeah. Um, Something that came up when we were working on this was a movie kind of from the same era of the original in 1989 called Meet the Feebles
Oh,
Mm.
yeah.
by Peter Jackson, long before Peter Jackson helmed the Lord of the Rings trilogies. But um, my understanding might be kind of an unfunded New Zealand shot, very R-rated spin on the Muppets. I don't know if you
Hmm.
guys have seen it, but it's
I
all
have not.
puppets. It's all these insane perverted little animal characters getting into all sorts of shenanigans, drugs and violence. It is it's hard to watch. It's not for everyone. It's absolutely absurd and it's goofy. And I don't think we need a reboot or a reimagining on every single thing from our childhood. But um, if Macon got his hands on the IP, I know Brooke and I would have a lot of fun with just doing something that, again, it's got live action, pretty disgusting puppetry